Hi, I'm Anna of All Trades, and today I'm going to talk to you about how to sharpen a hook knife. This is probably one of the most asked questions I get on my feed when I'm posting pictures of spoon carving is how you sharpen a curved blade like this. And the first thing you need to understand to get a sharp blade is what actually makes a sharp blade. When you're sharpening a blade, basically what you're doing is you're pushing a burr back and forth between two surfaces. So when you're talking about chisels, that means you have to have a perfectly flat back, and then you sharpen the bevel edge. And when you sharpen the bevel edge and then you turn it over and flatten the back, you are basically just pushing that burr back and forth. You start with that low grit and you move up through the grits, basically making that burr smaller and smaller. So you graduate to a 1,000 stone and you have this wire thin burr. You graduate to a 2,000 or a 4,000 grit stone and that burr becomes even smaller, and you're always sharpening the bevel and the back of the blade alternatively. The reason I like this knife is because there's actually a hollow in this portion of the knife. So I've started making my own spoon knives lately, and I definitely adapted this. When it comes time to sharpen, you're just registering on 2 points as opposed to trying to balance it across a whole curved blade. As a general rule with all my blades, whether it be chisels or plain blades, I sharpen every 15 minutes of use. And then that allows me to just quickly touch up the edge instead of have to remove like massive amounts of material. So when it comes to sharpening this, I have a series of little dowel sticks that I've made. You can staple them, you can glue them, it depends on how much of a hurry you're in, but I like to use wet dry sandpaper, and I have just various dowels with various grits. What I'm doing here this is the cutting edge here, remember? And I'm pushing and rotating. And this knife, because there is this hollow grind, is really easy for me to sharpen because it's registering on 2 points. And I just do this until I've raised a burr on the opposite edge. And so all you're doing when you're sharpening a blade is you're pushing a burr or excess metal back and forth. So I'm going to sharpen this edge until I can feel a burr on this side across the whole edge of the blade. And once I've got a burr, then I just need to take that burr away. So I simply take my strop and I really carefully move it along the edge. And so I'll try that from a different angle here just so you can see it. And again, I'm working just on the push stroke, and I'm watching what I'm doing, and I'm rotating the knife and pushing with this strop as I'm going there. And what I'm doing there is removing the burr that I've just made. If I was actually sharpening with a lower grit piece of sandpaper and it wasn't a tiny little burr, it was maybe a bigger burr because I was removing a nick or something, then I would make a sandpaper strop to do the exact same thing. And I would take it and I would be careful that I'm rubbing it in the right area on the blade, and I'm just doing this at a weird angle so I can show you right now. But I just use this to really carefully wipe away that burr. If you're worried that you're not doing it right or something like that, then grab a Sharpie and black out this whole edge, and then you can see when the Sharpie is removed from the edge along the whole area of the blade, then you've covered the whole blade. Grab a higher grit and you just polish that edge a little bit more till you can feel a burr across the whole edge. Then you grab the next highest grit and you just do this again. The higher the grit, the longer lasting your edge will be. But this is, I mean, you don't have to be too crazy about any of this. You can stop at about 600 and then strop it and you're good to go. So say your hook knife doesn't have a hollow grind. You can sharpen it any other hook knife the same way. These are actually Mora knives that have been modified so that they can have a more useful handle, as well as the backs have been ground over so that they are more useful. They come with a very steep bevel, which requires you to attack the spoon at such an extreme angle you actually can't get a very high quality cut, if you can get a cut at all, which is especially difficult in dry woods. In green woods, you have a whole lot more flexibility as far as what your what angles you can cut at and still get a fairly decent result. But basically, a Mora knife is really easy to fix if you have the time and patience and a few tools to do it. These were made very easy by having a belt grinder, and you basically just take and you grind that bevel back and blend it back into the blade so that it is easier to attack your spoon from a viable angle. So the reason why this angle is better is because it allows you to use the piece of wood as a support system, so that you're not just going and just trying to scoop out an enormous amount of material. I think as far as spoon carving goes, slow and steady is pretty much the name of the game. But let's go back and just talk a little bit about sharpening these Mora knives. So these Mora knives don't have they don't have the hollow grind like the other one, and that's totally fine. It still sharpens exactly the way I showed you on the other knife. You just need to be a whole lot more careful and intentional about your movements. So again, using a Sharpie here is going to help, so that when you do go to remove material, you're removing it from the correct place. And then same thing on the back. You just write a Sharpie edge onto the tip there, and that can act as a guide so that you know you're removing material, not just from the extreme edge, creating a secondary bevel that's going to make it harder to cut, but also just from the whole back edge. And again, I found these paddle things to be a lot more useful, and I start further back and I adjust the angle of my paddle until I'm removing material from the whole edge. And not just, I want to creep up to that front edge here. And it's just, with any one of these things, it's a matter of patience. To modify these Mora knives, it was really easy to do with a belt sander, and just being really, really careful to remove the material from where you wanted it removed. But you know, if you don't have a belt sander, it's totally fine to do this with a file or with sandpaper. It's just a matter of patience. So thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section, and stay tuned for other videos in this series that are coming up. We're gonna have a whole lot of fun making our own forge, making our own hook knives, making our own axes and carving knives. It's gonna be a hoot.